Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another podcast episode from Let's Watch the Golden Things. This podcast is called The Golden Things Podcast. I'm your host, Zane, and this podcast is being brought to you from the wonderful city of Erbil, the capital city of the Kurdistan region of Iraq, the semi-autonomous zone that is in northern Iraq. Yes, it is different from federal Iraq. I know many people are a bit confused about this, but we will be covering this later on in this episode. But this episode is going to be focusing on the U.S. Embassy, history, a little bit about it, where is it, how big is it, what's going on with the current situation with the U.S. Ambassador Matthew Tueller, and just in general, why are there all these rumors about the embassy closing? So let's dive right in. I mean, I don't want to waste any time here, but we recently made a podcast episode on the 28th of September. That was on Monday, 2 days ago. And we talked a little bit about, the U.S. Embassy, and not really at length. It was only an 8-minute podcast. But one of the points I want to bring up right away is that shortly after we made that podcast, the U.S. Embassy, the Green Zone, was again targeted by these, what they're called Katyusha rockets. So militia elements, most likely backed by Iran, fired another round of rockets into the U.S. Embassy. And this is something that has been of great concern to the U.S. diplomatic community, to Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State. More specifically, is that U.S. diplomatic personnel are being targeted in Iraq by the Iranian-backed militias, and the Iraqi government is not doing enough to stop them. So, in a sense, this happened again right after we released that podcast episode, and actually, I think up to 5 citizens, Iraqi citizens, were killed by this rocket attack. It missed the target. It missed the U.S. Embassy, which is on the banks of the Tigris River, and it's a very unfortunate event, and this has been going on all summer. It's been going on all year. Actually, the U.S. consulate in Basra was closed in 2018, I believe, over a rocket attack from most likely Iranian-backed elements, militia groups. So Pompeo closed the consulate in Basra, and now all we have is the U.S. consulate here in Erbil, where this podcast is being broadcast from, and we have the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. So a little bit about the embassy, a bit of history. So the current ambassador is Matthew Tueller. He's the chief of mission, and you'll actually see the caption of this video. I'm talking to Matthew Tueller back in 2019, last year. We were at a 4th of July celebration, my beautiful wife Paria and I, back when she was pregnant with Raylan, and I got the chance to meet Matthew Tueller. He's a great guy. And I've actually met the U.S. Consul General, both the previous one, Ken Gross, and the other previous one, Steve Fagan. And now there's a new Consul General. I don't know his name, haven't met him. But yeah, that's the caption photo. But what I want to talk about is the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, where Matthew Tueller is the chief of mission. It's not really clear at the current moment whether or not Matthew Tueller is in Iraq. Is he in the Al-Assad Air Base in Anbar province? Is he here in Erbil, just a few kilometers away from us at the U.S. consulate? We're really not sure what's going on. There's a lot of speculation as to, is the U.S. really going to close the embassy? But just a little bit about the embassy. It's 104 acres, and it's the largest and most expansive embassy in the world, nearly as large as the Vatican. I mean, this place is just massive. It sits inside what's known as the Green Zone. You guys might have seen that movie called The Green Zone. I believe it had Matt Damon in it. But it's 5 times the size of the U.S. Embassy in Yerevan, Armenia. And this place is a $750 million facility with, at a peak, 16,000 employees and contractors in 2012. And the embassy has its own, power, its own water system. It's got its own internet that's independent of Iraqi internet. So, if there's ever the government, the Iraqi government, which they do and they have done, especially during the mass protests that we're hearing that started in October 2019, the Iraqi government, they closed the internet. So no one's got any internet. But the U.S. Embassy, due to it has its own networks, runs its own networks. They don't have to experience, loss of internet or outages or anything. Also here in the Kurdistan region, we we have our own internet as well. So when the federal Iraqi government, they're experiencing mass protests, they shut the internet down so people can't share videos and pictures on social media of human rights abuses. Basically, we in the Kurdistan region don't have to deal with the outage of internet. But the embassy in Baghdad, it's just huge, and it's a big symbol of U.S. foreign policy in Iraq. It is, it was completed. The current embassy was completed. It started in 2008 and was completed years later, but it's along the banks of the Tigris River, and it's just a very big symbol of U.S. foreign policy, especially when it comes to Iraq. And Iraq, as you all know, the United States invaded Iraq in 2003 with the goal of removing Saddam Hussein and bringing democracy to the country. And since then, and we've pretty much seen chaos in the country since 2003. With the eventual pullout in 2011, and pretty much the evacuation of all diplomatic personnel, all military, and now we've got, the U.S.-led coalition, we've got the embassy, we're doing, community outreach, we're engaging the Iraqi people, but all that was stopped with the recent tensions with Iran. Donald Trump has had a hardline policy against the mullahs, against the regime in Iran, and we're seeing the effects play out here in Iraq being used as a battlefield in a sense with these Iranian-backed militias against the U.S.-led coalition forces. And Pompeo, Trump, the U.S. administration is very worried about, in my opinion, is very worried about a Benghazi-like situation. If y'all remember, in 2012, the U.S. Ambassador was killed in Libya when the consulate or embassy was raided in Benghazi, and that was a big deal. That was really bad. And back then it was the Obama administration. Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. Secretary of State, ladies and gentlemen, for your information, the Secretary of State of the United States is essentially the foreign minister, and they're responsible for all U.S. diplomatic missions across the world. So basically, Mike Pompeo, closing the embassy in Basra was a step that Pompeo did to ensure that a Benghazi-like situation wasn't going to happen in Basra. And now it seems like they're doing it in Baghdad. They don't want a hostage-like situation to occur, a raid into the compound, taking hostages. We saw it in Iran in 1979 with the Islamic Republic, I guess, being established when the Shah was kicked out by the I guess you would say the Islamic Revolution that happened in Iran. So that was the last time we saw hostages, and they don't want that to happen again. And I guess hostages, I don't know if there were hostages taken in Libya, but these things shouldn't happen, and the Iraqi government should do a better job to rein in these Iranian-backed militias, to prevent these rocket attacks, to prevent any threats. I mean, we just saw in December of 2019, we saw Iranian-backed militias and what the mainstream media says protests, but this was really a raid to break into the compound and set fire and try to cause as much destruction as possible. This wasn't a quote-unquote protest, it was more of a riot. But I see a lot of articles, including this one from the New York Times, say that this December 2019 was just a protest. But in a sense, this was not a protest. It was exactly the opposite. It was a riot. This was not a peaceful thing. Protests generally should be peaceful and are categorized or labeled as peaceful. But the embassy, this is a big deal, and it's really unclear what's going on with the ambassador. He is appointed by the president, and he is the one who's responsible for all things that go on. He's the U.S. representative. He's the voice of the American government in this country. And it is yet to be known. Is he in Al-Assad? Is he up here in Erbil? What's going on? We're really, as American citizens in Iraq, we're wondering, what's going to happen. All consular services in the embassy in Baghdad were suspended in early January, shortly before the U.S. Took out Qasem Soleimani. So, that's been, I guess if there are U.S. expatriates, Americans living in Baghdad, it's going to be difficult for them to go to the embassy. Let's say someone loses their passport, needs to renew their passport. they're going to have difficulty going, down the street or taking a taxi to the embassy to do that. Not only because it's closed, but because Baghdad relatively isn't that safe. And that's what I want to get with this next topic that I said we're going to talk about, a little bit about Baghdad versus Erbil and the differences between the cities. I don't really know numbers specifically, and I don't think anyone has expat numbers for this country, but I can almost 100% safely say, I can't be 100% verifiable here, but there are more U.S. expats in Erbil, in the Kurdistan region, than in Baghdad. Why? Well, Erbil is just a safer city. Erbil is a much more tolerant, a much nicer place to live. And that's just the facts, okay? I'm not saying that because I've lived here for 3 years and I started my life here, my professional working career, and that, I've raised my family here. No, I'm saying that because that's the truth. Erbil is a much safer city. It's a much nicer city. It has a higher standard of living. The people are nice. I'm not going to say anything about the people in Baghdad. They're nice. I've been to Baghdad before. It was much different than Erbil. I'm not going to speak about people and culture. All I'm going to talk about is, quality of living, things like that, the facts that I know. So Baghdad, as I know, movement is very difficult. There's a lot of traffic. There's T-walls everywhere, which are those blast walls that prevent, kind of protect buildings from car bombs. There's barbed wire lining the streets. Many things are closed. They oftentimes are closing roads due to perceived security threats. And Baghdad has come under fire in a lot of years leading up to now. It's pretty much, it's a city of 7 million people, but it's been under attack by ISIS, by other terrorist groups, and there have been car bombs, mass civilian casualties, and unfortunately Baghdad has been bleeding for a while. It's been safer as of late. I mean, I haven't seen as many explosions in the news, but I remember it was like a daily occurrence when the ISIS caliphate was controlling almost a third of this country, that Baghdad was being consistently attacked with car bombs, with explosions, IEDs, improvised explosive devices, roadside bombs, and various other terrorist attacks. While Erbil, here in the Kurdistan region, we've never really experienced any of that. There was a car bomb in, I don't know if it was 2014, 2015. There was a car bomb in Ankawa near the U.S. consulate, but it's not really clear if that was a suicide bomb, or some people are saying it was just a timer bomb where, someone left the bomb in the trunk of a car, walked away, it blew up a little while later. But, just in general, the cities are much different, and it would actually benefit, in my opinion, the Iraqi, country, the Iraqi community as a whole, and the U.S. expat community that's living here in the country as a whole, if we can close this embassy, shut it down for a while, take a break, and just let's concentrate here in Erbil. I personally think that's the way to go right now. I mean, tensions are at an all-time high. Iran wants the U.S. out. Everyone is saying if the U.S. leaves the embassy, there's going to be, a big propaganda victory for Iran, that they won, that they kicked the U.S. out. But let's not forget, we still have military bases all over the country, including the Anbar Air Base, which is a massive facility. And it's not really going to be a victory for anybody. And it would probably serve, at least in my interests, okay, and probably for the rest of the Americans, which I know there are a number of them living here in Erbil, probably thousands in the Kurdistan region. It's going to be much easier for us to go about our lives with, with full consular services that you would be provided at an embassy, also provided here in Erbil. I mean, that would be a great thing. You wouldn't have to travel to Baghdad to access immigrant visa services, non-immigrant visa services. All of that stuff could be done in Erbil, and there are still flights going daily from Baghdad, even in COVID times, even with the coronavirus. There are still flights going daily from Baghdad to Erbil. So, Iraqis that need to access, U.S. visa services, Iraqi Americans, they can come to Erbil with a flight. You could also drive, but I don't think the drive from, it's like a 4-hour drive. I don't think it's 5-hour drive. I don't think it's very safe from Erbil to Baghdad. But it would just be in general better. We made a blog post on our website, thegoldenthings.xyz, And I talked a bit about, why it would be better. I didn't really go too in depth, but I mean, just if you remember, if anyone who's an Iraq watcher, an Iraq follower is listening to this podcast, you can look back to January, right after the U.S. killed Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis is a militia leader, and Qasem Soleimani was the both of these gentlemen who are now dead were leading, pretty essentially what I would call terrorist groups here in the country. And the Iraqi parliament, shortly after this happened, voted to expel U.S. military forces from the country. And they were chanting, out, occupier, we don't want Israel. I can't remember exactly what they said, but they were chanting essentially like, no, America, get out occupiers, no, Israel. So, I mean, these Iraqi politicians, these parliamentarians, these MPs, they're elected by democratic elections. They're put in office by the Iraqi people. So, to me, this shows that through the actions of the MPs, this is what generally the Iraqi people want. I know there are other people in the media saying, no, the main Iraqi population wants America in this country because it's better for the Iraqi economy, and it's better for Iraq as a whole to have the U.S. here. I know that there is that sentiment, but when you have the politicians chanting out occupier, out America, we don't want the U.S., why do we need to be in Baghdad anyways? I mean, that's the real question here. Why should the American taxpayer have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a facility that is probably hardly being used by American citizens? I would say with confidence that most U.S. citizens are living in the Kurdistan region at the moment. I don't think that many U.S. citizens, and if there are, you guys can comment if you're listening, and you can berate me in the comments, but I don't believe many U.S. citizens are living in Iraq due to safety concerns right now. We are all concentrated, all the U.S. expat community is concentrated in the safe, secure, and the stable Kurdistan region of Iraq, which, if you guys check my blog post on thegoldenthings.xyz, you can see various images. There's one down at the bottom which clearly shows the line of the Kurdistan region and a kind of what you would say a disputed area, and then you have federal Iraq. So that kind of ties up the last of the topics. But just going back, to this whole thing and what's going to happen, I think this, the U.S. saying that it's going to pressure, the U.S. saying it's going to close the embassy is pressuring Iraq and the Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa Kadhimi to do more to, control these Iranian-backed militias and make it safer for the U.S. to help Iraq and help the Iraqi economy. That is what the United States wants. The United States does not want to control this country. The United States government wants to benefit Iraq and have Iraq prosper and have a healthy economy, lift people out of poverty. I don't believe, we always hear these conspiracy theories, and we hear that, U.S. just as in Iraq for the oil, blah, blah, blah. Well, I don't believe that's true. I believe that the U.S. is doing its best to help Iraq recover from the ISIS crisis that we had from 2014 to 2017. And as the country has moved into a post-conflict, more development stage, the U.S. is ready, companies are ready to come in and help and do the best they can. But in a sense, it's more hard to do that now than ever with these Iranian-backed militias who are a powerful political force in this country. And they are intimidating NGO workers, they're intimidating humanitarians, they're going around launching rockets. And if the U.S. does close this embassy in Baghdad, I guarantee you all the other countries that have embassies in Baghdad are going to leave too, because once the U.S. leaves, no one else is going to stay, because the U.S. has been piggybacking, has been holding the entire world on its back when it comes to Iraq. Everyone follows what the U.S. does. If you guys disagree, if you think that I'm wrong, that's fine. But this is my opinion. I think that, let's say the U.S. does close the embassy in Baghdad. Well, what's going to happen? They can move everything to Erbil, and there's no rockets being launched at Erbil. There's no, protest where people are burning the reception of the U.S. Consulate General. That doesn't happen here. Everyone's going to come to Erbil. And that makes sense at this current time because the threat of the Iranian militias is just something that can't be ignored any longer. I mean, it got to a point where Matthew Tueller, American U.S. ambassador to Iraq, said that there was a threat of potential hostage taking. I mean, we don't want that. And so I think that's going to do it for this podcast. This topic really I'm passionate about because, I've lived here in Iraq for the past almost 4 years. I've lived in the Kurdistan region for the past 4 years. And my wife has been here for much longer. I think in total we're about 10 years here. So I hope you guys like this podcast. I'm going to try to keep this going every few days. Talking, with an insider perspective, of Iraq, of the Kurdistan region, and try to, help give some more insight as to what the mainstream media, tells you guys. You see all these articles on the New York Times, you see all these articles in the Washington Post, you just hear tidbits, 1 minute and a half on CNBC, on, ABC. So I think this podcast can do a lot to help bring a more inside, perspective to Iraq as a whole, to the Kurdistan region, to Erbil, the wonderful city of Erbil, where this podcast was recorded in. And yeah, I think that's going to do it. If you guys like this podcast, please let me know. Please, give me your feedback. Was I too intense? Was I biased? I want to keep this unbiased, but I also want to give you the facts and call out other articles and other sources when I believe that they don't have the full grip on the actual reality of the situation here. Because when you do live here for 3 years and you talk to Iraqis, you talk to, the local community, you do have a more sound understanding of what's going on. So ladies and gentlemen, with that, that's going to be it for the second episode of the Golden Things podcast. And I'd like to invite you to like this video, subscribe to our channel if you haven't, and let us know your feedback in the comments. If you didn't like this video, you can leave us a thumbs down. That is okay as well. So ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be it for us. We'll see you in the next podcast. Thanks for listening.